Hello and welcome to today's edition of the Daf Yomi. Today's Daf 57 Amud B of Menachot. Let's dive straight in. So we're talking about different opinions of Rabbi Yosef Glili. The Gemara asks, how is it possible to leaven the meal offering brought with libations? This type of meal offering is needed only with olive oil, which is a type of fruit juice. And there is a principle that fruit juices do not leaven dough. Reish Lakish says that Rabbi Yosef Glili would say, so what's the fun? Omar Haya Rabbi Yosef Glili. Later commentaries infer that this expression that is the opinion of the Rabbi Yosef Galili alone, and that the other Tanaim do not agree that one may need the meal offering of libation in water, the Chazon Ish of Rashash and Egros Moshe. Even though the oil of the meal offering brought with libation is plentiful, sometimes one might also need the meal offering with some water if he considers it necessary to add it, and it is fit. If so, it is possible for this meal offering to leaven due to the water, and therefore the verse that you shall bring teaches that the prohibition against leavening also applies to this type of meal offering. The Gemara asks, with regard to Rabbi Akiva's opinion, the vessel into which 1/10 of an eighth of flour for baking the shewbread is placed in is a measuring vessel for dry items, and we have heard that Rabbi Akiva said the measuring vessels for dry items were not consecrated as service vessels. This means that the shewbread becomes consecrated only when it's placed on the table in the sanctuary after it's been baked. If so, at this stage, the prohibition against leavening is not relevant. In answer to this question, the Gemara states that Rabbi Reuven, who's that? Rabbi Reuven was from the third generation of the Morim Eretz Yisrael. Very little is known of him, apart from the fact that he was a student of Rabbi Mana, with whom he would discuss halachic matters. Most of his statements, which are cited in the Jerusalem Talmud and Midrashim, concern matters of Agada. Sent a letter. So what does that mean? Shalach. The transfer of halachic tradition from study halls in Eretz Yisrael to those of Babylonia was a frequent occurrence which has left a significant mark on the Talmud. Sometimes this transfer was performed by the sages themselves when they descended from Eretz Yisrael to Babylonia. On other occasions, the rulings were sent in letters. Usually these traditions are introduced in the Gemara by a general formula, so-and-so sent, although sometimes it states explicitly so-and-so sent in his letter. Such a letter was considered an authorized halachic source, and some of the sages raised difficulties against the opinion of another sage on the basis of such a letter. Accordingly, the sender of the letter took great effort to ensure the accuracy of the tradition. He would sometimes state at the start of the letter, I asked this matter to all of my rabbis and they did not give me an answer, but the following is stated in the name of so-and-so. Alternatively, he would note that this halachic tradition is in the name of a specific rabbi and add, and all my rabbis said it to me in his name, as an endorsement of the tradition. In which he cited a statement in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. This is the correct version. Let's see in Hebrew. Heitzea. And what does that mean? Heitzea version. From the root Yud Sadi Ayin, which means spreading out, as in the spreading out Hatzaat of a bed or of merchandise for sale. In this context, it refers to the laying out of an accurate version of the Braita. Of this Braita, and you should reverse the names of the sages in it. The phrase that you shall bring serves to include the shewbread in the prohibition against leavening. This is a statement of Rabbi Yosef Glili. Rabbi Akiva says this phrase serves to include the meal offering brought with libations in the prohibition against leavening. Consequently, there is no contradiction between Rabbi Akiva's statement here and his statement with regard to measuring vessels for dry items. The Gemara comments, and Rabbi Yochanan holds that Rabbi Yosef Glili is the one who maintains that the measuring vessels for dry items were consecrated. Follows, what's the Hebrew word? It's not in the text. The Atzta, what's that? Atzta, the accepted interpretation of Atzta or Azur in plural is follows. As in the verse, the king answered and said to the Chaldeans, the matter follows, Azda from me, if you make not known to me the dream and the interpretation thereof, you shall be cut in pieces, and your houses shall be made in a dunghill, in Daniel 2:5. If so, it is similar to Aramaic Azla, as the letter Lamed is exchanged for the Dalet. Others say that Azda means strength, i.e. he is strong in his opinion, like the Hebrew Zadon, which refers to power. This line of reasoning stated elsewhere. As Rabbi Yochanan says, Rabbi Yosef Glili and one of the students of Rabbi Yishmael both said the same thing. And who was a student of Rabbi Yishmael? it is Rabbi Yoshia. As is taught in the Braita, the verse states with regard to the consecration of the tabernacle and its vessels before their inauguration. And it came to pass on the day that Moses had made an end of setting up the tabernacle, and had anointed it and sanctified it, and all its vessels, and the altar and all its vessels, and had anointed them and sanctified them. Numbers 7:1. Rabbi Yoshia says, the measuring vessels for liquid items, e.g. oil and wine from their basin, were anointed and thereby consecrated both on the inside and on the outside. So what's the footnote? Nizach ben bifnim ben b'machutz. The later commentaries dispute the meaning of the statement. Some maintain that this does not mean that the anointing itself was performed on the inside or the outside of the vessels, as in any case the vessel would be anointed only on one spot. Rather, it means that anointing could be effective only with regard to one side, but here it was effective with regard to both sides. Chazon Ish agrees Chadushe Batra. Alternatively, it is possible that the inside and outside of a vessel are considered like two different vessels, and therefore it must be anointed on both the inside and the outside. And that's from the response of the Rashba and the Chazon Ish. The measuring vessels for dry items, such as the flour for meal offerings, were anointed and consecrated only on the inside, but were not, anointed on the outside. What's the footnote? Meshichas midas halach v'hayavesh. There were 2 measuring vessels for dry items in the temple and 7 for liquids. All these measuring vessels were consecrated and were considered service vessels. The difference between them was that the measuring vessels for liquids were consecrated both on the inside and the outside, whereas the measuring vessels for dry items were consecrated only on the inside in according to the opinion of Rabbi Yeshaya. Not Hoshia, isn't it? That's in the Rambam Sefer Vodei Hilchot Kili Mikdash 1:16-18-19. Rabbi Yonatan says the measuring vessels for liquid items were anointed on the inside and were not anointed on the outside, whereas the measuring vessels for dry items were not anointed at all. Rabbi Yochanan said to prove his opinion, you can know that the measuring vessels for dry items were not consecrated at all, because it is told that these vessels do not consecrate items placed inside them. As it is written, and you shall bring out of your dwellings 2 wave loaves of 2/10 parts of an ephah. They shall be of fine flour. They shall be baked with leaven for the first produce to the Lord. In Leviticus 23:17. When are they considered consecrated to the Lord? Only after they are baked with leaven. This demonstrates that when the flour is placed into 1/10 of an ephah measuring vessel, the meal offering is not yet consecrated. The Gemara asks, with regard to what principle does Rabbi Yoshia and Rabbi Yochanan disagree? They disagree with regard to interpretation of the word them in the phrase and sanctified them in Numbers 7:1. Both Tanaim agree that the term them serves to exclude something from the anointing and consecration, but they disagree over what is excluded. Rabbi Yoshia maintains that them serves to exclude the consecration of the measuring vessels for dry items on the outside, i.e. only on the inside of the vessels is consecrated. Only the inside of the vessels is consecrated. And Rabbi Yonatan maintains that the measuring vessels for dry items are non-sacred, i.e. not consecrated at all, and therefore it is not necessary for the verse to exclude them. Where it was necessary for the verse to exclude something, it was with regard to measuring vessels used for liquid items, to teach that they are consecrated only on the inside but not on the outside. The Gemara asks, since the dispute between Rabbi Yoshia and Rabbi Yonatan concerns the halacha of measuring vessels for dry items, that Rabbi Yonatan also say, as he did with regard to Rabbi Yosef Glili and Rabbi Yoshia, Rabbi Akiva and one of the students of Rabbi Shmuel both said the same thing. And who is that student? Rabbi Yonatan. The Gemara explains, Rabbi Yonatan did not say this due to the fact that their opinions are not the same with regard to measuring vessels used for liquid items. Rabbi Akiva maintains that these vessels are consecrated both on the inside and on the outside, whereas Rabbi Yonatan rules they are consecrated only on the inside. But Papa said that Abaye, how can it be suggested according to the opinion that the measuring vessels for dry items were not consecrated, but that the shrew bread is consecrated only when it is placed on the table? And before there is the stage on which dough is placed into the receptacle, a bisa. What's a bisa? Some say that it is a combination of 2 terms, isa, which means dough holder, in reference to the standard use of this vessel for dough. Others suggest that it is short for be a seah, as it can contain the volume of a seah in which it is needed. Since this vessel is used for liquid items, the dough should be consecrated at that point. Abai said to Rav Papa, this is referring to a case where he kneaded the dough on top of a flat leather spread, a katavlia. What's that? From the Greek katabole, a foundation beginning, which does not sanctify the dough. The Gemara asks, if so, with regard to that which Rabbi Yonatan said to Rabbi Yoshia as proof of his opinion, that you can know that it is so, as it is taught that these vessels do not consecrate items placed inside them, let Rabbi Yoshia say to him, in refutation of his claim, this is referring to a case where he measured the flour for the 2 loaves in a vessel used for measuring 1/10 of an ephah, but it was a vessel that was non-sacred, and it is for this reason that the loaves are not consecrated. The Gemara responds, how can these cases be compared? Granted, one can say that the shubed was kneaded on a leather spread rather than in a receptacle. The next one does not write in the Torah that one should specifically use a receptacle to knead the shubed. Therefore, when one kneads the dough of a meal offering on top of a leather spread, we have no problem with it. But in the case of 2 loaves whose flour was measured in a vessel used for measuring 1/10 of an ephah, since the measure one states explicitly to use a vessel of 1/10 of an ephah and measure with it, can it be suggested that the one preparing the meal offering should leave aside the consecrated vessel for 1/10 of an ephah and measure with a non-sacred vessel for 1/10 of an ephah? The sages taught on a brayta. From where is it derived that one who offers up outside the temple courtyard a portion of the meat of a sin offering, with regard to the meat of a sin offering, of a guilt offering, or of an offering of lesser sanctity, or the leftovers of meal offerings, the surplus of the omen, the bird sin offering, the shubin, and the 2 loaves, or the log of oil of a leper, if one can bring up an olive bulk of any of these as leaven or with honey, whether on the altar or the ramp, he is liable to receive lashes. Although none of these are suitable for burning, since they are called an offering, one is liable in accordance with the brayta. This ruling of the Rambam puzzles the Ravid, who insists that the brayta here is discussing these portions in their own right, not when they are sacrificed as leaven or with honey. See the Kesef Mishnah and the Lechem Mishnah attempts to reconcile the opinion of the Rambam with the brayta. Rambam Sefer Voda Hilchot Yisurim Mizbech 543, or a portion of the meat of a guilt offering, or a portion of the meat of offerings of the most sacred order, or a portion of the meat of offerings of lesser sanctity, or a portion of the surplus of the Omer offering, or a portion of the leftover of the 2 loaves. So what's a footnote? Many commentators are puzzled by the expression the leftover parts of the 2 loaves, as no part of the 2 loaves are sacrificed on the altar. Consequently, how can one speak of leftovers? Indeed, all the manuscripts in the Tosefta and Menachot read from the 2 loaves. Some of the later commentators explain that the 2 loaves can be called leftovers relative to the offering of the sheep on Shavuot that render them permitted, and that's from the Olet Shalom Sirashi. I.e. the public offering on Shavuot of the 2 loaves from the new wheat or the shubed, or the remainder of the meal offerings, that in all these cases he violates the prohibition, although these items are not meant to be sacrificed on the altar. The Brayta answers, the verse states, any leaven and any honey, you shall not burn any of it as an offering made by fire to the Lord, Leviticus 2:11. The extra term of it teaches that any item that has already had some part of it burned in the fire on the altar is excluded in the prohibition do not burn, stated in that verse explicitly with regard to honey and leaven. The Gemara asks, and with regard to the 2 loaves and the shubed, is there some part of them burned in the fire? But isn't it taught in a brayta that a portion of every offering is sacrificed on the altar, except for the 2 loaves and the shubed, as no part of them is burned in the fire? Rav Sheshet said, although no part of the 2 loaves or the shubed themselves is burned in the fire, nevertheless, they include the prohibition against offering them up on the altar, since they are not viewed as independent entities, but rather as part of larger offerings. The 2 loaves accompanying the sheep sacrifices burnt offerings on Shavuot, and are permitted for consumption only once those sheep have been burned on the altar. Similarly, the shubed is permitted for consumption only after the bowls of frankincense that were on the table with it have been burned on the altar. The Gemara discusses the prohibition against offering up on the altar part of the offerings after the sacrificial portions had already been burned. It was stated with regard to one who brings up any of the items listed in the brayta onto the ramp, Hamalem mikulam al gabei hakeves. The ramp is designed to serve the requirements of the altar and is subordinate to it, and therefore it should be considered part of the altar. Nevertheless, the ramp was not actually attached to the altar, as there was a slight gap between them. See Zevachim 62b. The early commentaries note that whenever the altar is mentioned in the Torah, it refers to the altar alone, not the ramp. Even Rabbi Yonatan, who states here that the ramp is considered like the altar with regard to the prohibition against bringing up parts of the offerings whose portions have already been sacrificed in the altar, maintains that this halacha is derived from the superfluous expression in the verse, not from the definition of the term altar itself, and that's from Tosfot. And there's a picture, if you have to go on page 37, of the ramp and the altar and the gap between them, leading up to the altar, but not to the altar itself. Rabbi Yonatan says he is liable, and Rabbi Elazar says he is exempt. The Gemara elaborates. Rabbi Yonatan says he is liable, as is taught in a Brayta. After the verse, as any leaven and any honey, you shall not burn any of it as an offering made by fire to the Lord. The next verse states, as the offering of first fruits, you may bring them to the Lord, but they shall not come up to the altar for a pleasing aroma. Leviticus 2:12. I derived only that this halacha applies to an item that is brought on the altar. From where is it derived that the same applies if it is brought onto the ramp of the altar? The verse states, but they shall not come up to the altar for a pleasing aroma to be accepted, and the ramp is a means to ascend to the altar. And what is the reason Rabbi Elazar says that one who brings up parts to the ramp is exempt? As the verse states, for any leaven and any honey you shall not burn any of it as an offering made by fire to the Lord. As an offering of first produce you may bring them to the Lord, but they shall not come up to the altar for a pleasing aroma. In Leviticus 2:11-12. The Gemara explains the term them indicates that halacha applies only to the offerings that come from leaven or honey and which are called an offering of first produce. This category consists of first fruits which are brought from dates and other sweet fruit, and which are called the choicest first fruits of your land, Exodus 23:19, and the 2 loaves, which are leaven and are the first meal offerings brought from the new crop each year. In other words, it is with regard to this category that the verse amplifies for you the halacha that the ramp of the altar is considered like the altar itself. With regard to other items, e.g. meat of sin offerings and the guilt offerings, the ramp of the altar is not treated like the altar itself. That's the end of the Omen. Thank you for listening and all the best. Bye.